The whole room heard the slap. Her husband's mistress stood there shaking, while his mother clapped slowly behind her. He looked down at his wife on the floor and told her to leave. She didn't move, because in exactly 4 minutes, someone in that room was going to regret everything. Before we go any further, if you've ever stayed quiet while the people you loved the most treated you like you were nothing, this story is going to feel personal. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what this woman does next is something you will never forget. Now let me take you into the life of a woman named Elise Morrow, and I need you to pay close attention, because this story, it doesn't go where you think it's going, not even close. The boardroom at 10b Pharmaceuticals sat on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Atlanta. It was the kind of room designed to make powerful men feel even more powerful. Long mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city like the whole world existed just to be looked down upon. On this particular Tuesday morning, 31 people sat inside it for the annual shareholder review. Board members, executives, investors, assistants, all of them gathered to hear the quarterly numbers and nod at projections they barely understood. The coffee was imported. The pastries were arranged on silver trays, and the egos in that room were stacked so high you could barely see the ceiling. Marcus Morrow, the company's chief financial officer, stood at the front of the room in a charcoal suit with a confidence that came not from knowledge, but from the fact that nobody in the room had ever challenged him. His voice was smooth, his slides were clean, his cufflinks caught the light every time he gestured toward a chart, and he gestured often, not because the data required it, but because Marcus liked the way people watched his hands. His mistress, Dominique Stanton, sat 2 seats to his left, dressed like she had been placed there by a casting director, which in many ways she had been. She was the junior VP of marketing, but the way she carried herself at that table, leaning back with one hand resting on the arm of her chair like she was posing for a magazine, you would have thought she owned the building. And sitting in the front row, not at the table but off to the side like a guest at her own funeral, was Gloria Morrow, Marcus's mother. 62 years old, pearl earrings, pressed blazer, lips that hadn't smiled with warmth since the 90s, and a mouth that had never once said anything kind about the woman her son had married. Nobody expected Elise to walk in. She was never invited to these meetings. Marcus made sure of that, the same way he made sure she wasn't at the company gala last spring, wasn't at the investor brunch in the Hamptons, wasn't in the family portrait Gloria had taken and framed above the fireplace, without telling anyone she was doing it. Elise had been erased from every public corner of Marcus's life, so gradually that most people in the company didn't even know he was married. But on this morning, Elise pushed open those heavy double doors and stepped into the room with nothing but a plain brown purse and a look on her face that sat somewhere between determination and heartbreak. She had found something at home, a letter from a law firm she didn't recognize, addressed directly to her, referencing something called Estate Trust Number 07WM and the name Pennington Pharmaceuticals. She didn't understand it, not fully, but something inside her, something old, something quiet, something inherited from a man who had once told her to count to 4 and then move, told her she needed to be in this room today. The moment she walked in, the atmosphere shifted. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. His jaw tightened. The smile he had been wearing like a pressed shirt disappeared. Gloria turned around slowly, looked Elise up and down, and whispered loud enough for 3 rows to hear, "Here comes the embarrassment." A few board members exchanged glances. One woman at the far end of the table looked at Elise with something close to pity. Dominique didn't even flinch. She just crossed her legs and leaned further back in her chair, like she had been expecting this moment and had already rehearsed exactly how little she intended to care. Elise walked toward Marcus. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't loud. She didn't make a speech or cause a scene. She simply approached him and said quietly, almost gently, that she needed to talk to him about a letter she had received, that it mentioned this company, that it mentioned her grandfather's name. She said it the way a wife should be able to say things to her husband, privately, respectfully, without fear. But Marcus didn't even let her finish. He put up one hand like he was stopping traffic. He lowered his voice into that sharp whisper he used when he wanted to make her feel small without anyone hearing the blade, and told her this was not the time. He told her she shouldn't have come. He told her she was making a scene. His eyes didn't have anger in them. They had something worse, annoyance. The kind of annoyance a man shows when something he considers beneath him dares to interrupt his spotlight. But it was Dominique who made the scene. She stood up from her chair slowly, deliberately, smoothed the front of her skirt, and walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of Elise. She was taller, she was louder, she smelled like an expensive department store, and looked at Elise the way a woman looks at something she's already decided doesn't matter. She looked her up and down, the plain blouse, the flat shoes, the purse that probably cost less than Dominique's lipstick. And then she said something that hit harder than any hand ever could. She said Elise had a habit of showing up where she didn't belong. She said it calmly, almost sweetly, like a woman reading a verdict she had already signed. And then, without hesitation, without warning, without a single person in that room stepping forward to stop it, Dominique raised her right hand and slapped Elise across the face. The sound cracked through the boardroom like a gunshot in a cathedral. Every head turned. Every breath stopped. Elise stumbled sideways, her hand reaching for the edge of the table and missing. Her purse hit the floor, and from inside it, a small bronze pocket watch rolled out across the polished marble, spinning in slow circles until it came to a stop near the leg of the conference table. Nobody picked it up. Nobody moved at all. Marcus looked down at his wife on the ground, his expression flat, his arms hanging at his sides like a man watching something on television that didn't concern him, and said 5 words, "You need to leave, Elise." And behind him, from the front row, Gloria Morrow clapped, slowly, deliberately. 3 slow claps, each one louder than the last, like she was watching the final act of a show she had been producing for years. But here's what nobody noticed. Not Marcus, not Dominique, not Gloria, not a single one of those 31 people in that room. Elise didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She got to her knees, reached for the pocket watch, picked it up, and closed her fingers around it tight, the way a child holds on to the one thing they trust when the world stops making sense. Then she stood up. She steadied herself. She looked at the room one final time, not with tears, not with hate, but with something none of them had the depth to recognize. It was patience, the kind of patience that only comes from a woman who knows that her time has not yet arrived, but is absolutely certain that it will. She walked out of the boardroom without a single word. The doors closed behind her, and inside that room, 31 people returned to their meeting like nothing had happened, because to them, nothing had. That's the thing about people who live in towers. They never see what's growing beneath them. But something had happened, something enormous, something irreversible, something that every person in that room would spend the rest of their lives wishing they could undo. That slap, that moment, was the last time anyone would ever look down on Elise Morrow. They just didn't know it yet. To understand who Elise really was, you have to leave Atlanta behind. You have to go south, past the highways and the billboards and the subdivisions, all the way down into Valdosta, Georgia, where the roads get narrow and the trees get tall and the air smells like pine and warm earth after a summer storm. That's where Elise grew up, not in wealth, not in comfort, not in any of the things that the world uses to measure a person's worth. She grew up in something richer than all of it. She grew up in love that didn't come with conditions. She was raised in a small clapboard house at the end of a dirt road, with a screen door that never closed all the way and a porch that leaned slightly to the left, like it was tired. Her mother, Pauline, worked double shifts at the county hospital. Day nurse, night nurse, whatever they needed her to be. Her father's name was never spoken because he had left before Elise could even form a memory of his face. But there was one person who filled every empty space in that child's life, and his name was Walter. Grandpa Walter, a tall, slow-moving, deeply dignified man who ran a tiny pharmacy on the corner of Broad and Vine. The folks in town knew him as the man who gave free medicine to families who couldn't afford it. The man who never raised his voice, not once, not even when teenagers stole candy from his counter or insurance companies denied his claims. The man who wore the same brown cardigan every winter and always kept a peppermint in his shirt pocket for any child who walked through his door. Nobody in that town, not a single soul, had any idea what Walter Morrow was quietly building behind the walls of that little pharmacy. He was not just mixing prescriptions back there. He was filing patents. He was funding research. He was building a pharmaceutical empire through a private holding structure so carefully designed that it would take a team of forensic accountants and 3 independent law firms to trace it back to him. And nobody ever did, because nobody ever thought to look at a quiet black man in southern Georgia and imagine that kind of power. That was Walter's greatest advantage. The world's inability to see him clearly was the very thing that let him build something they could never take away. But Elise didn't know any of that. What she knew was one single afternoon that changed the shape of her entire life. She was 9 years old. The sun was low and orange, and the porch was warm beneath her legs. Grandpa Walter sat beside her on the wooden step with something small and heavy in his hand. It was a bronze pocket watch, old and scratched, with a faded inscription on the inside cover. He placed it in her palm and curled her little fingers around it gently, like he was handing her something fragile and eternal at the same time. He told her the watch had belonged to his father and his father before him. He told her that time is the most powerful weapon a patient woman can carry. He said people will always underestimate a woman who is quiet, but quiet doesn't mean empty. Quiet means full. Full of things other people are too loud to hear. And then he said the words she would carry inside her chest for the next 25 years. When the world gets loud, baby girl, you just hold this and count to 4. By the time you get to 4, you'll know exactly what to do. She didn't understand it then. Not really. She was 9. She thought it was just a pretty thing an old man said on a warm day. But she held on to that watch like it was a piece of his heartbeat. And as the years passed, she would learn that Grandpa Walter didn't speak in metaphors. He spoke in instructions. There were other afternoons on that porch too, afternoons where Walter would tell Elise about his own father, a man who picked cotton in fields that didn't belong to him and still came home every night with his dignity intact. He told her about the women in their family, her great-grandmother who walked 11 miles in the dark to deliver medicine to a neighbor's sick child, her grandmother who taught herself to read from stolen newspapers and then taught every child on their road to do the same. He told Elise that the Morrow blood was not just blood. It was a record of people who survived by being smarter than the systems that tried to break them and kinder than the world that tried to harden them. He told her she carried all of that inside her, and she believed him the way children believe the truths that are too big to question. Elise grew up quiet, not shy. Quiet. There's a difference that most people never bother to learn. Shy means you're afraid of the world. Quiet means you're watching it. Elise watched everything. She studied hard, kept her head down, helped her mother around the house, and earned a nursing degree from a state school 2 towns over. She never chased money, never fantasized about penthouses or designer bags or the kind of life that looks beautiful in photographs but feels hollow in person. She just wanted to help people, the same way Grandpa Walter helped people. Without fanfare, without applause, without needing a single person to clap. When Walter died during her 2nd year of college, the grief hit her like a wall. Her mother told her he had left behind nothing but debts and a closed-down pharmacy. The family held a small funeral, buried him under a magnolia tree behind the house, and moved on the way poor families are forced to move on, quickly, because the bills don't stop for broken hearts. Elise kept the pocket watch. She never questioned the story about the debts. She had no reason to. Love doesn't audit the people it trusts. At 26, she met Marcus Morrow at a hospital fundraiser in Atlanta. He was magnetic, tall, well-dressed, well-spoken, the kind of man who made you feel like the only person in the room, even when the room was full. He told her she was the most genuine woman he had ever met. He said he was tired of pretending around people who only cared about money and image. He said she felt like home. And Elise, who had never been told anything like that by any man, let alone one who looked at her the way Marcus did that first night, believed every single word. Because when you grow up without a father, the first man who calls you special holds a power he doesn't always deserve. They married within a year. She moved into his world, the big house with rooms she couldn't find uses for, the galas where she stood by his side in dresses that didn't feel like hers, the Sunday dinners at Gloria's house where every compliment came wrapped in an insult and every silence was louder than a shout. And for a little while, maybe the first year, it was beautiful. Marcus was attentive. He opened doors. He kissed her forehead before he left for work. But slowly, like a fog rolling in off dark water, the warmth disappeared. He stopped asking about her day. He stopped laughing at her jokes. Gloria started picking apart her clothes, her accent, her grammar, the way she held her fork. The Morrow family treated her like a decoration that had been hung in the wrong room, visible but clearly out of place. And Elise, because she was raised to fight for her marriage, not against it, stayed quiet and held on. Because that's what patient women do. They hold on. Even when the thing they're holding on to has already let go of them. Now let me walk you through the 2 years that nearly broke this woman in half. Because what happened in that boardroom didn't start with a slap. It started with silence. The kind of silence that fills a house when love dies, but nobody is brave enough to say, the funeral is over. It started when Dominique Stanton was hired at 10b Pharmaceuticals. She came in sharp, hungry, and fully aware of the landscape. She was the new junior VP of marketing, but from the very first week, her eyes were on more than campaigns and quarterly reports. She had studied the company, she had studied the players, and she had studied Marcus, his ambition, his vanity, his need to be admired by someone who made him feel powerful. Dominique didn't just want Marcus. She wanted everything that came with him, the title, the lifestyle, the family name, the seat at the table that Elise had never been allowed to pull up to. She was smart, she was strategic, and she knew exactly how to play a man who was already looking for a reason to leave. Marcus and Dominique started working late, then traveling together, then texting at hours that had nothing to do with quarterly projections or marketing budgets. Marcus would come home at midnight, smelling like a cologne Elise hadn't bought him, wearing a loosened tie and a face that didn't carry a single ounce of guilt. He would sit on the edge of the bed with his back to her, scrolling through his phone with a half smile she hadn't seen directed at her in months. Elise noticed. Of course she noticed. A woman always knows. The question isn't whether she sees it. The question is how long she convinces herself she's wrong. And Elise, raised on loyalty and patience and the belief that love was something you fought for, convinced herself for far too long, but she said nothing, because the woman she was raised to be didn't throw accusations into the dark. She prayed. She hoped. She waited for the man she married to come back to who he used to be. She waited the way a woman waits for rain in a drought, believing it has to come because the alternative is too painful to accept. But Marcus wasn't coming back. He had already left. Not physically. Physically, he was still in the house, still eating her food, still sleeping under her roof. But emotionally, spiritually, in every way that actually mattered, he had packed his bags the day Dominique smiled at him across a conference room table and made him feel like the most important man in the building, and Gloria made sure the door stayed open. Marcus's mother had never liked Elise. She made that clear the very first time they met, a tight smile, a handshake that lasted half a second, a long look up and down that said everything her mouth didn't. Gloria thought Elise was beneath the Morrow name, too plain, too country, too soft. She wanted a daughter-in-law who could hold a room, command a dinner table, wear the family name like a crown. And when Dominique entered the picture, Gloria didn't just welcome her, she recruited her. She began inviting Dominique to family dinners, to holiday gatherings, to brunch with her friends. She praised Dominique openly. Her ambition, her wardrobe, her confidence, the way she spoke to people like she expected them to listen. She told Marcus privately, more than once, that Dominique was the kind of woman who could elevate him, and that Elise was a sweet girl, sure, but sweetness doesn't build legacies. She even started giving Elise the wrong dates for family events, texting her that dinner was on Saturday when it was really on Friday, so that Elise would miss every gathering, and then Gloria would tell Marcus that Elise simply didn't care enough to show up. It was a campaign. Quiet, cold, coordinated, and devastatingly effective. And Marcus, who had never once in his life stood up to his mother about anything, let it happen. Dominique played her role with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment her entire career. She redecorated Marcus's office without asking, replacing the framed photo of Elise on his desk with a crystal award she had won at a marketing conference. She accompanied Marcus to galas where Elise used to stand beside him. She sent expensive gifts to Gloria, scented candles, handwritten cards, bottles of wine that said, "I see you and I value you," in a language Gloria understood perfectly. And on social media she posted photos with Marcus. Never too obvious, never too intimate, but always close enough to send a message. A hand on his shoulder at a charity dinner. A group photo where she stood beside him, and Elise's place was simply empty. The message was clear, simple, devastating. I'm here now, she's not. Elise withdrew. It happened slowly, the way a candle dies. Not all at once, but flicker by flicker until one day you look over and the room is dark. She stopped attending company events. She stopped trying to make conversation at Gloria's dinners. She ate alone most nights at a kitchen table designed for 6, in a house with 12 rooms and not a single one that felt like home. She slept in the guest room, not because Marcus told her to, but because lying next to someone who doesn't want you there is a kind of loneliness that the English language hasn't invented a word for yet. At night, she would sit on the edge of the bed, holding the bronze pocket watch, turning it over in her palm, whispering to Grandpa Walter like he could still hear her. She asked him what she should do. She asked him why love had to hurt this much. She asked him if patience was really strength, or if she had been holding still so long that she had forgotten how to move. One night, she gathered everything she had left inside her and sat Marcus down. She didn't accuse him. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at him with tears sitting right behind her eyes and asked him, gently, if he still loved her. He didn't hold her. He didn't take her hand. He looked at her like she was an inconvenience, like she was a problem on a spreadsheet that refused to resolve itself. He told her she was paranoid. He told her she was insecure. He told her Dominique was just a colleague and that she was embarrassing herself by even asking. Then he stood up, put on his jacket, and left the house without saying where he was going. That was the night Elise stopped crying, not because the pain ended, but because something inside her went numb. And numb, as anyone who has lived through it will tell you, is the most dangerous place a quiet woman can go. Because when a woman stops crying, it doesn't mean she's healed. It means she's done negotiating. It means the version of her that begged, that hoped, that waited. That version has left the building, and whatever comes next is going to be something nobody is ready for. 1 week before the boardroom incident, Elise found a pair of diamond earrings on the nightstand in her bedroom. Not the guest room, her bedroom. They were small, elegant, expensive. And they still carried the faint scent of the perfume Dominique wore to every company dinner. Elise held them in her hand for a full minute. She didn't scream. She didn't throw them across the room. She placed them neatly on Marcus's pillow, like a woman laying a single flower on a grave she had already decided to stop visiting. That same week, a letter arrived. Heavy, cream-colored envelope, gold embossed letterhead, Payne, Griggs and Associates, attorneys at law, addressed to Elise Morrow alone. She held it in her hands, and her fingers trembled. She almost didn't open it. She was so deep in grief that even hope felt dangerous. But then she saw it, in the lower left corner, printed in small, careful letters, the name Walter Morrow. She pressed that envelope against her chest, the way she used to press the pocket watch against her heart when she was 9 years old. She didn't open it yet. She wasn't ready, but she carried it with her every single day after that. Because sometimes the thing that saves you arrives wearing the name of someone you lost. Here's the thing about time that most people get wrong. They think time heals. They say it all the time. Give it time. Time heals all wounds. But that's not the whole truth. Time doesn't just heal. Sometimes time reveals. Sometimes it peels back every layer of every lie and lays the truth out on the table like a hand of cards nobody saw coming. And Elise Morrow's time, the time her grandfather had been counting on for over 2 decades, had finally come. 72 hours after Dominique Stanton slapped Elise Morrow in front of 31 people, an emergency board meeting was called at 10b Pharmaceuticals. Nobody knew who had requested it. The notice came through the company's legal counsel, marked urgent and mandatory. There was no agenda attached, no documentation, just a date, a time, and a room number. Marcus assumed it was a compliance issue. He told Dominique to come prepared. He told Gloria to be there for appearance. He wasn't worried. He had never been worried, and that was always his fatal flaw. He confused comfort with safety and arrogance with control. The boardroom filled the same way it had 3 days earlier, same table, same chairs, same view. But the energy was different. There was a weight in the room that nobody could name. Like the 30 seconds before a storm breaks, and the birds go quiet, and every living thing goes still, because it knows something is about to change. And then the doors opened. Elise walked in. But this was not the same woman they had watched fall to the floor 72 hours ago. This Elise moved like weather. She was wearing a tailored black suit that fit her like it had been waiting for this moment. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were dry, clear, and steady. There was no anger in them. There was no sadness. There was just certainty, the kind that cannot be taught, only inherited. She didn't rush. She didn't scan the room for sympathy or validation. She walked the way her grandfather used to walk into that pharmacy every morning, like a person who knows exactly where they belong, even if nobody else has figured it out yet. And pinned to her left lapel, right over her heart, was the small bronze pocket watch, polished, gleaming, visible to every person in that room, like a medal earned in a war nobody else knew she had been fighting. Behind her walked a man none of them had seen before. Tall, silver-haired, dark skin, immaculate gray suit, leather briefcase. His name was Attorney Lewis Payne, senior partner at Payne, Griggs and Associates. He didn't introduce himself at the door. He didn't smile. He walked the way men walk when they know the weight of what they carry and are in no rush to set it down. Marcus let out a short breath that was almost a laugh, the nervous kind. He asked Elise what she was doing. Gloria rolled her eyes. Dominique smirked, the same smirk she had worn right before she raised her hand 3 days ago. Attorney Payne did not acknowledge them. He placed his briefcase on the table, opened it, and removed a thick folder of documents, cream-colored, gold-stamped, bound with a precision that only comes from something prepared over decades. He addressed the room and introduced himself as the executor of the Walter Morrow Trust. And then he said something that changed the air in that room forever. He told them Walter Morrow did not die broke. He told them the man who ran a corner pharmacy in Valdosta, Georgia, was the silent original founder of 10b Pharmaceuticals. He had built the company over decades through a private holding structure, acquiring patents, funding research, establishing distribution channels, all under a corporate veil so carefully constructed that not one person in that boardroom had ever heard his name. He retained 81% ownership through a sealed irrevocable trust designed to activate on one specific date, the 34th birthday of his eldest living grandchild. That grandchild was Elise. Her birthday had been 3 days ago, the same day she was slapped across the face in this very room. Attorney Payne distributed copies to every board member. 3 independent law firms had verified the documents. The trust was airtight and irrevocable. Elise Morrow was now the single largest stakeholder of Pennington Pharmaceuticals, a company valued at just over $10 billion. She didn't merely inherit shares, she inherited controlling ownership, the power to hire, fire, restructure, and redefine every inch of the institution that had treated her like she didn't belong. Marcus stood up. His face had gone the color of wet cement. His mouth opened, but nothing came. 8 years of marriage, and he never once asked about her grandfather beyond what was convenient for dinner party small talk. Never once drove to Valdosta. Never once asked about the man whose pocket watch his wife held against her chest every night while she slept alone in the guest room. And now that watch was pinned to the lapel of the most powerful person in the building. Gloria gripped the armrests of her chair like she was trying to hold herself inside her own body. The woman she had called an embarrassment was now the most powerful person in the room. Her lips moved like she wanted to say something, but for the first time in her entire life, Gloria Morrow could not find a single word. Not one. The woman who had spent decades controlling every conversation, shaping every narrative, deciding who mattered and who didn't. That woman had just been silenced by the truth, and the truth didn't even raise its voice. Dominique sat down slowly. The smirk was gone. Her hands, the same hands that had slapped Elise, were trembling in her lap. The woman she had struck was now her employer, her superior, and her judge. Elise stood at the head of the table. She did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. She looked directly at Marcus and said one sentence, calm, quiet, and so final that every person in the room would remember it for the rest of their lives. "You told me to leave. I came back, but you won't be here when I'm done." Then she addressed the board. She announced 3 immediate actions. First, a full internal audit of all executive conduct over the past 24 months. Second, a comprehensive review of every hire, promotion, and contract signed under Marcus's financial oversight. Third, the immediate suspension of Marcus Morrow and Dominique Stanton, pending investigation. She stated each one clearly, without emotion, without pause. And when she was finished, She pulled back the chair at the head of the table, the seat that had been empty for years, the seat no one ever offered her, sat down and opened the meeting. Nobody said a word. What unfolded over the next several weeks was the kind of reckoning that makes people believe in karma. Not as something mystical, but as the plain mathematical consequence of treating someone like they don't matter and then discovering they matter more than you ever imagined. The audit revealed what Elise suspected but never wanted to believe. Marcus hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been stealing from the company, quietly redirecting funds into personal accounts and a private investment venture with Dominique. It wasn't just betrayal, it was embezzlement. Within 3 weeks, Marcus was terminated. His assets were frozen. He went from CFO to defendant faster than he could call a lawyer. And the lawyers he did call couldn't help. The evidence was in the hands of the board that now answered to his wife. Dominique moved fast because self-preservation was her only real skill. She tried to reach Elise. Messages, voicemails showing up at the corporate lobby. Elise didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, there was simply nothing to say. When the door stayed closed, Dominique turned on Marcus. She leaked his private texts and emails to the legal team to separate herself from the scandal. It backfired. The board saw through it. Not accountability, but a woman willing to destroy the man she had helped betray a marriage with, just to protect herself. She was terminated the same week. Marcus called her that night, desperate, grasping. She didn't answer. She never called back. Because Dominique was never loyal to Marcus. She was loyal to what he could give her. And now that he had nothing, she vanished, without loyalty, without roots, without looking back once. Gloria tried to maintain her position at a family gathering, holding court the way she always did. But for the first time, someone broke rank. Trent, Marcus's younger brother, the quiet one, the one who had watched everything and swallowed his words for years, stood up in the middle of the living room and told the truth. He told the family how Gloria had sabotaged the marriage, how she had excluded Elise, fed Marcus lies, and welcomed Dominique like a replacement. The room went still. Nobody defended Gloria. For a woman whose identity was built on control and the appearance of respect, the silence of her own family was the loudest punishment she had ever received. She was not cast out, but she was no longer the center, and for Gloria, irrelevance was a kind of death. Marcus came to see Elise one last time. She was in the corner office now, the one with the windows and the view he used to point to when telling people how far he had come. He walked in looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. His suit didn't fit the way it used to. His voice cracked at the edges. He tried to apologize. He said he didn't know. He said he was sorry. Elise let him finish. Then she said something that would follow him for the rest of his days. "You didn't need to know what I was worth to treat me with respect." She let the words hang. Then she asked him to leave. He walked out the same way she had walked out of that boardroom, alone, with nothing, in silence, no one clapping behind him, just the hallway, the hum of lights, and the echo of his own footsteps bouncing off everything he would never get back. Trent came to see her separately. He sat across from her with hands folded and eyes full of grief. Grief for the years he stayed silent. He told her he was sorry for not speaking sooner. Elise looked at him for a long time and said, "Silence isn't always cowardice, Trent. Sometimes it's survival." Then she offered him a role at the company, not for his last name. Because when the moment came and the cost of truth was high, he chose to stand. That kind of character was worth more to Elise than any resume. 3 months later, Elise drove south. She took the long way, past the highways, through the stretches of Georgia where the land opens wide and the sky gets so big it makes your problems feel small. She drove until the roads turned to dirt and the trees turned to pine and the air smelled like warm earth and memory. She drove until she reached Valdosta. She stopped in front of Grandpa Walter's old pharmacy. It was still standing, barely. Windows boarded, sign faded. Weeds crawling up the steps like they were trying to hold the building together the same way memory holds a person. Imperfectly, but with everything it has. She stepped out of the car. Jeans, white cotton blouse, no power suit, no heels, just the pocket watch pinned over her heart. She climbed the porch steps, the same ones where a 9-year-old girl sat beside her grandfather and received a gift that would take 25 years to understand. She sat down on the wooden step. She pulled out the watch, opened it slowly, and read the inscription one more time. The words she had read 1,000 times, in 1,000 moments of pain and patience. Count to 4, then move. She closed it, and she smiled. Not a big smile, not a performance, just a real, quiet, honest smile. The kind that only comes after a storm passes and you realize you're still standing. Elise Morrow didn't win because she inherited money. Let me be clear about that. Money doesn't undo a slap. Money doesn't erase the memory of your husband's face when he told you to leave. Money doesn't fill the silence of eating alone for 2 years in a house that was supposed to be a home. Elise won because she never stopped being who she was. She stayed kind when they were cruel. She stayed graceful when they were vicious. She stayed patient when everything screamed at her to break. And when the pocket watch told her it was time, when those 4 minutes were finally up, she moved with a power none of them saw coming, because not one of them had ever looked closely enough to see it. And that was their loss, not hers. Elise stood up from the porch. She looked out across the field, the same one she used to run through barefoot as a little girl. But now something new was rising in the distance. A construction crew, scaffolding, a foundation being poured, and a brand new sign being lifted into place. It read, "The Walter Morrow Community Health Center." She watched it for a long time. Then she turned, walked back to her car, and drove forward into a life that finally, after everything, belonged to her. And if Grandpa Walter could have seen her in that moment, standing in the Georgia light with the pocket watch over her heart and a health center rising behind her, he would have smiled too, because he always knew. He knew that the loudest power in the world would never belong to the people who demanded attention. It would belong to the ones who were patient enough to wait, strong enough to endure, and wise enough to move when the time was right. He built a $10 billion company in silence, and his granddaughter inherited it the same way, in silence. And that silence, in the end, was louder than every voice that had ever tried to break her. If this story moved something inside your chest, if you felt Elise's silence, her pain, and that moment she finally stood up, then you already know this channel is different. Hit subscribe, turn on that notification bell, because the next story we're bringing you, it might be even more powerful than this one. Share this with someone who needed to hear it today. And remember, your worth was never decided by the people who couldn't see it.